also appreciate you being here and look forward to our having a little chat tonight. I want to start with, I'm going to throw out a couple of questions and we'll both sort of respond and talk to each other about it. But the first is, why do you write?
Yeah. I don't know, that's like one of those big generic writing school questions. I don't know, I guess I think everybody is a storyteller in some regard. And, whether you're a lawyer in a courtroom or you're writing a report at work or whatever, you're a storyteller. You've got to tell a story. And I think I come from a family of storytellers. I come from a big family. We would always sit around the dinner table, try to squeeze in. It probably began with my father. He told a lot of good stories about growing up in Philadelphia and so forth. And his father told stories, and my grandmother was a good storyteller. So I guess it's somewhat genetic, but things have to happen, I think, for writers to realize that they're writers. And I'm not somebody who knew when I was 8 years old I want to write. It was very late for me. I was about 19 when I decided I wanted to try to do it. I wasn't even sure I could ever do it. But it was something about reading, being a voracious reader, looking for story. I love reading crime novels, but I was always looking for stories that had another dimension of social reflection or a reportage. It wasn't just who did it or him solve the puzzle. And when I was able to find those kind of books, that's where to me inspiration came, and eventually I said I want to try to do this. How about you?
Well, I think to a certain extent it's a mystery, why we do what we do, and a lot of times I think we look at those things too closely to our peril. I think it's okay that we don't know exactly why we do certain of these things, because I think they go pretty deep within us. But I'm one of those that I can't not write. That's my way of being in the world. That's my way of processing. That's my creative outlet. And I growing up, I also didn't know I wanted to write until what I consider to be later in life, which was college. But I did try other creative outlets. I thought, well, I would be a musician, or an actor or a screenwriter or those kind of things. And it just, when I discovered the novel, what it could do, then I wanted to try to do that myself. And I forget who said it, but a writer is a reader moved to emulation. That's what we are. I mean, we read something that changed us in some way, and we're like, that I've got to try that. I've got to try to do that for someone else. And so that's the only way I can answer that.
Well, I think it's interesting that you say I have to write. Maybe because I'm in an advanced age or something, but I read it, like Elmore Leonard was writing books till he passed away in his mid-80s. It's like, I don't know if I'm someone who has to write. I mean, I actually want to get good at golf, and so I want to fish, in Tampa Bay and all that. I can see a time where maybe I don't quit, but I can see a major slowing down. And so I don't have, it's like sometimes when I hear people talk about that, or I hear someone say, I knew when I was 9 years old I wanted to write, I want to be a writer, I keep thinking, like, what am I missing? And I think I'm more like of a craftsman than someone who emotionally or deep down has this need to tell a story.
That's very interesting. Okay, the second question is, I'll ask two together. One is, why crime fiction? And I've heard you say that you don't see yourself writing anything else because you can do anything you want to within that. But the next question was, would you consider writing anything else? So start with why crime fiction?
I just think it's what I like to read. I think it can go back to one night growing up in Fort Lauderdale where I was a witness to a crime, and I spent the night with detectives, and it was so impressive on me. These tough guy detectives and dealing with me, dealing with the crime, dealing with suspects. And I just had like a front seat because I was a witness. I was sitting there in the detective bureau, and from that night on, just gravitated towards crime fiction, true crime, reading crime stories in newspapers, and it's just never left. I mean, that happened like 45 years ago, and I still don't feel the need to explore other avenues of storytelling. And you know, once I got into it, as you were just talking about, you realize it's a pretty cool framework to tell your stories in. You can tell any kind of story you want within that framework, and so it's to me, it's kind of like if it's not broken, don't fix it. And so you know, I just continue. Usually when I'm coming towards the end of a book, another idea comes through, and it's always the crime fiction. If something else came through, a romance or something, then I guess I would write that. I just have a feeling that won't come through.
And I agree. There's nothing you can't do, I think, with the crime novel, and I think you're dealing with really important, issues, and you can touch on so many different things in society, but also just in the depths of humanity, and both in terms of what we're capable of on both ends of the spectrum, and our motivation. And so I love crime fiction. That's what I love to read, and early on especially, that's what captured my imagination. So that's what I wanted to do. I have dabbled in other things. I've written some of the screenplays I've written have been outside of that genre. I've written one, so I guess sort of love story novella, but otherwise it is crime fiction, and I love it. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, using that answer, your answer, why don't you say how this book came about? Because like me saying that I'm always going to write a crime novel, it's rare that the idea starts with a crime. It's not usually a plotting device. It's usually something else that I start with, and that leads me to the book I write. And I'm very curious about this. I read your book, obviously, and I have some questions about where it came from, but maybe you can just say, and I won't have questions.
Well, with Innocent Blood, which is the 7th in my John Jordan series, and this is sort of simultaneously the 1st and the 7th because it's a prequel, and it goes all the way back to John's beginnings as a detective, as someone who's interested in those things. And I knew in creating John back in the summer of '94 that Atlanta was going to be a big part of his past, but also the Atlanta child murders, and that they were happening when he was a child, and the victims, resembled his best friend, and so that has just always been there. And I really thought, I've heard you say many times that the best novels, the best work in a case is doing it forward and backwards. You're sort of going, and I thought that would happen with John Jordan, that there would be these things alluded to, and as the series went along, more and more would come out, but a little bit here and there. And my wife said, why don't you just write one set back there? Why don't you go back and once that happened, once the idea, it was just magic. I mean, it really was something special. And then I got to see all the ways in which my experiences and John's and Atlanta and this case intersected. For just one example, I went to a really small theological school in Atlanta, and it was connected to one of the first interracial, fully integrated churches in the world. I'm a spiritual person, but not particularly religious, and I was not a big church goer, and I don't go to church now. And so this was this was an anomaly in my life, that I was attending this church and doing this. And while there, in 1986, someone, a fellow student or someone said, the Atlanta child murderer contacted Bishop Paul and said he wanted to talk to him, wanted to confess, wanted to, and they set up a meeting. And well, that just stuck. That was just there. And so, it's all these things to me are inexplicable. And this alchemical thing happens when you're writing, and it sort of all comes together.
The body of another young boy was discovered in the early hours of the morning. In effect. Action News is next on Atlanta's WSB TV. The body was found in the Chattahoochee River. City held captive. Across the metro area, one grim case follows another. A witness has come forward. Officials announced there are still no leads. Children in the Black community are being abducted and murdered. It's 11 o'clock in Atlanta. Do you know where your children are? The boy's body was found in an abandoned schoolhouse near the Fulton County Stadium. Every great character has a past. Few are as entertaining, as thrilling, or as tragic as that of ex-cop turned prison chaplain John Jordan. When he was 12 years old, he came face to face with the man who would be convicted of the Atlanta child murders. 6 years later, John returned to Atlanta, determined to discover who was truly responsible for all the slaughtered innocents.
And that'll lead into the next question, which is, I think we've both described our approach as sort of improvisational. You know, I start with, you get an idea, or you get a character, you get a concept, and for me, I just sort of live with it for a while, you know, and try to get to know who they are, and I'll just sort of daydream, just sort of live with try to saturate my brain or my consciousness with these people and this idea. But when I start, I know very little, you know. I know, because it's a mystery, and I care about, you know, a whodunit, and try to, I want to do a whole lot more, but I do try to reward the reader with the surprise of whodunit and a good motivation for why they did it. I start usually knowing whodunit, or what's going to, you know, sort of a vague idea of the end, and maybe a few of the things that I think are going to happen along the way. But then every single morning, I am just anxious to get to the keyboard to find out what happens next. And I honestly don't know. I mean, I have ideas, and I have, you know, but until it comes out, don't really know. And by doing it that way, which you've compared to jazz, and I think a lot of other people have, that, you know, that it's thrilling, and, you know, and it's exciting, and to me, and this could be total bullshit, okay? This could be, so take it for what it, but to me, you're reaching into something deeper than your own mind, or your own, especially your conscious mind. Maybe you're going a little deeper, and there is some kind of magic or something that happens. I think it was Norman Mailer, I'm quoting a lot of people tonight, I'm probably getting them all wrong, but it said, if you put your subconscious on notice that you're going to sit down at a certain time and write, it'll prepare the material, it'll be there. And I've never, no, I can't say never, but rarely has that not been the case. So that's my approach, and do research as I have to, you know, but keep the momentum, keep it going. Is it similar to you, or what?
No, you're right, that was total bullshit. No, yeah, I mean, I think it's all about the process of, you know, however long it takes to write a book, you know it's going to take that long. For me, it's usually about 10 months, and it's kind of a daunting exercise when you're on day one of 10 months, and you just got to keep plugging away and hope you have something good. So to me, it's about fulfillment on a day-to-day basis, and it's just more fulfilling for me to not know what's going to happen and to see what would happen, other than to keep looking at a pad of paper that tells you what to do. It's like that pad becomes your boss. And it also constricts you. So like you said about jazz, I mean, there was a jazz pianist named Keith Jarrett, who when he does a concert, he doesn't know what he's going to play, and he just goes off, and you can kind of see in his face when he surprises them. I've seen him play a few times, when he's surprising himself, when he gets this internal fulfillment, and that's what you try to do, I think, as a writer. Now, we're seasoned writers. We've been writing for years and years. I mean, it's very hard to write your first book that way, so I always say I outlined my first book. But that was the last book I ever outlined, because just the learning process of writing that first book helped me to move into this improvisational way of doing it. And, you know, it's not like I sit down on day one and don't have any idea. I don't sit down on day one until I know how we're going to get into the story and how we'll get out. But that still leaves, you know, 300 pages of not knowing what's going to happen and having moments of fulfillment within a day, a week, and so forth. I mean, you can just one little comeback and dialogue can make your whole day, and all that stuff kind of comes up, I think, in the improvisational process. But now that we're talking about improvisational, this is a book that has a framework around it about something that really happened, even though there's all kinds of unanswered things about the Atlanta child murders. So even though you're Mr. Improvisational like me, did you have a wall that had all these dates and times, and how did that all work out?
You know, for this book, it is probably the first time that I've used a real life case and married fiction and nonfiction together. And I tried to, everything about the case is you know, accurate, is what happened, is true. So yeah, more so for those kind of details, but in a lot of ways, those were the place, the sort of the starting point, and the other kind of things and where they intersect jumped off from there, you know. So it was definitely pulling those things together. I've had other, you know, real life cases that inspired things and took me in a direction, but I've never used a case like this, and I liked it. I really enjoyed doing it this way, and because this is something that's haunted John for a long time, it's going to be several books in the sort of Atlanta Years series within a series that I think will go, you know, maybe 4 or 5 books that he'll get to explore that, you know, and it continues to come up in the present, but where he really is dealing with that. So, next question, I'm going to read it, so make sure I get it right. Why does South, now Central Florida, Michael, not write about Florida, and North Florida, Michael, only writes about it? I'll answer mine. I mean, yours, and you answer mine.
No, I don't know why you would write about Florida. But, you know, Ellen mentioned Double Exposure, which to me is such a Florida book. You know, a book that celebrates, I mean, it's a, you know, crime novel and a chase through the wilderness, but it really celebrates that wilderness and explores it and tells you what's so good about this state in many ways, and that was one of the reasons why I loved it. But that's also, you could tell that was someone who has kind of matured as a writer in this place. I don't think I did that. I was a newspaper reporter, and I was somewhat of a journeyman. I moved around a lot, ended up in Los Angeles, and for some reason that was the town or the city, the place that struck me. That was my muse, I guess, to use a weird writer's phrase. And it stuck, and it has just stuck with me. You know, when ideas come into my head and I just gravitate, they seem to be all about Los Angeles. And also, it's, you know, writers just is a very, can't think of the right word, but, you know, I did try, I grew up in South Florida, I was a newspaper reporter there, and I wrote 2 novels. In fact, I really appreciated in your introduction, you told me, you said I published 28 books. I did, because I've actually written more than 28 books. I wrote a couple books that were learning experiences, and they were set in Florida, but they didn't deserve to be published. But I had to write them, you know, to get to the point where I could write something that should be published. And I think it was in that process is when I moved to California, and it all clicked in California. And I guess I'm superstitious, and so I keep going back to what works. And, you know, I had a day job, so I was writing that first book at night, and, you know, even though I write during the day now, you know, I black out my office and everything and make it seem like it's at night. I try to repeat the experience that worked, and I'm sure you have things like that you do. But now you try to answer that question.
I really like your answer, that the area you matured in as a writer. I like that a lot, and that makes perfect sense to me. And I think we're writing about more than a literal physical place or a location. You know, is there something spiritual about it? There's something imaginational. Maybe there's even something sort of. I think of, to me, a writer like James Lee Burke he's homesick. You know, he's writing about a Louisiana that doesn't even exist anymore, and he often says that. You know, and so I think that's sort of what's going on, is that but for me, North Florida is it. I mean, it is it. And I drove down to Orlando yesterday, and I have some family there, and I didn't even tell Dawn this, but as we were coming in, I remembered to my first early days as a writer and yearnings, and I, you know, maybe my first book was out or about to be, but I remember coming to Central Florida and like doing research and looking at things and saying, okay, how can I set a book here? And because I live in the middle of nowhere, you know, I'm like, you know, there's. And I thought, if I could just find a bigger area to write about, and through that process and trying to do that, I realized that North Florida is it, and I love it there, and it's a spiritual home as well as my literal physical one, and the things that I was thinking might be exotic or interesting about a different location, I think people will find that about the things that I find commonplace in the redneck Riviera where I live. You know, anyway. So I think we're doing what we can, and that involves those places.
I always feel bad though. I always feel bad that, you know, as you say, you write about the middle of nowhere, and I write about Los Angeles. So like all I have to do is open a newspaper. And there's like 100 ideas, so I don't even know how you come up with your ideas. And we watched what they're said.
That is, you know, it's interesting. I don't get a lot of material from newspapers and places like that.
20 new volumes at the library.
Right. But you saying that reminds me of, you know, like South Florida, where there's a lot of crime novels that come out of South Florida. They have great material, you know. I mean, last time I was down this way, I guess in Miami, speaking at a festival, there were other Florida writers there, and they were talking amongst each other, you know, and they were like, well, what's your favorite, most recent Florida story? And one of them said, well, it was this couple got into a dumpster to have sex and were robbed by a guy already in there. I thought, that's gold. You know, I don't get any of that. Okay, I want to. We've sort of touched on Atlanta, but I want to turn to you with sort of a follow-up to this place thing, because is Vegas for you? Do you use it because of its proximity, or is there something there about it? Because you've used it a good bit, and so I wondered if, you know, is there something about that place for you that's significant? You know, do you have a gambling addiction, or anything like that, or what is it about Vegas for you?
Luckily, I don't have a gambling addiction. I don't know. I mean, I think it's because a lot of people think LA is a not so nice city, and so therefore I put Las Vegas there so people realize LA is pretty nice. It's kind of like it's a satellite to Las Vegas, and in one of the books I remember I wrote that the difference between these two places is LA is hope and Vegas is desire, and there's a subtle differences between hope and desire, and I think those are the same kind of differences that are between those cities. And also, I try to write from a standpoint of reality, and as a journalist in Los Angeles for several years, covering police and crime and so forth, and there was such a connection in the crimes between the two cities. Like, every time some stupid criminal rob somebody, he'd head to Las Vegas to try to triple his money or something like that. So many people wanted in LA. First place to go look is Las Vegas, and so there was that kind of connection. I always, to steal a title from the great Raymond Chandler, I always looked at Vegas as the little sister to Los Angeles.
Nice. Very cool. Now you have that sort of cards or gambling thing going on there with characters and different things, and then of course you play cards with this castle dude. Are you interested in cards? Are you a card sharp? You play a lot? Or is that all fiction?
Yeah, it's all fiction. I mean, we don't on the show. We don't even play. It makes it look like we're playing. No, I don't. I actually don't have any kind of card fascination. I like reading about that stuff. Like another Florida guy, James Swain, writes very well about Vegas and cons and all that, and I love his books.
Okay, next one. Name, and you can discuss it if you would like a little bit, but 5 influential films. You don't have to come up with 5 if you don't want to, or you can come up with 15 if you want to, but or you can do 1 or 2 at a time. But yeah, we could easily mention books, and maybe we will. But let's start with film. And you know what? I'm gonna, since I'm holding the mic, I'm gonna say that you can't mention The Long Goodbye. Because everybody knows that's what set you on this journey. So take that one off the table and start with something else.
I don't know. It's just it's funny though. Before I knew or decided I wanted to be a writer, the first thing I thought was I'd like to be a film director. So films are very, very influential to me. So there's tons of them. I don't know how many rise to level of classic. I would say my favorite film of all time is Chinatown. I can't mention Long Goodbye, but that one was so influential on me. I actually rented the apartment that Philip Marlowe lived in, hoping for some of the vibe to rub off on me.
They did.
Yeah, I really like films from about 66 to 76 or maybe a little bit older. Bullet, Bullet is wrapped up in, my father loved crime movies, and my mother didn't, so I was always going with my dad to crime films, going back to like when I was 12 or so. He would just get me into R-rated movies and stuff. And the Bullet was extremely influential on me. Just this idea, the guy's name is Bullet, but just this idea of relentlessness, this idea of not saying too much. There's very little dialogue from Steve McQueen in that film. All that stuff was, I think, comes out in my writing, comes out in Harry Bosch, and then of course the Dirty Harry films were very influential in me as well. I somehow pretty much grew up in Florida. I'd never been to Los Angeles or California. I never went there until I interviewed for a job when I was 30 years old. But I just seemed to have gravitated towards television shows and movies that were all set there. Hickey and Boggs is an obscure movie. Bill Cosby, really good crime movie. So I don't know if that's 5.
Excellent. Yeah.
What are your 5?
Well, we share Chinatown because that tops my list. It's one of my favorite films of all time. And it's definitely top 5. And I love that the everything about that film. I mean, I don't think you could improve on that in any way. And the atmosphere is perfect, but even the sort of the way the true life experiences of the director, and how that affected the ending, and I don't know. It's to me, There's very few things I think you can say cannot be improved on. To me, that's one of them. Pizza is another. If you order it right, I think you can improve on pizza. But another one for me is Blade Runner. I've always loved that film, and that's also the atmosphere, and both of those, the soundtracks are just phenomenal, and so those are way up there. I really like Vertigo. That's one of my all-time favorites. And every time I recommend it to someone, I'm like, God, this is the slowest fucking movie ever. You know, why did you inflict this on me? But I really like sitting there and watching just experiencing that. You know, I like Hitchcock in general, but Vertigo to me is another one of those you can't really improve on that.
Or Kim Novak.
Yeah, well, you can't improve on Kim Novak. That's right. That's right. Good, very good point. We can mention others, but I'll stop there and let's move to musicians. Everybody knows you're thinks of you with jazz, and I think I am right in saying that jazz was something that Bosch brought you to, not the other way around. But outside of that, I wanted us to talk a little bit about like what we write to, what's playing. I mentioned jazz, but also just musicians in general. You know, I think Eric Clapton is one for you, but I'll mention a few of mine first. The first is John Mellencamp has been one of my all-time favorites, and especially, and I find this is so true of so many artists, but his stuff after his success, you know, after everybody sort of forgot about him, or maybe they didn't forget, but after he was not, you know, breaking any records or in the limelight or whatever, after he had a heart attack and almost died. I mean, some of the stuff he's written since then, it doesn't hurt that he collaborates with T-Bone Burnett. You know, the stuff they've done is just phenomenal. Another songwriter that just really gets me is a Canadian chick named Jan Arden. And if you haven't listened to her, I highly, highly recommend Jan Arden. Gin Blossoms are another band from the 90s that I just really, really love. Jason Isbell, recently, he's such a great songwriter. If you haven't, he's got a song, one song in particular I listen to over and over and over and over again, about a friend of his who's died of cancer. And it is one of the most profound 3 minutes you could ever, it's incredible. And I'll go ahead and touch on what I write to, and I've always written to music. And I don't like someone singing, no lyrics, no, you know, it's too distracting, it's too, so instrumental music, and it was writing that brought me to jazz, and there's Grant Green, his Idle Moments, the first track on there is something like 16 or 17 minutes, and it is the most perfect music to write to I've ever found, and so I will sit there and writing. And when it gets to the end of that track, I will reach over, push for it to replay. And you know, if my system was a little more up to date, I could just program it to do that. But I actually manually reach over there and touch it. And so I've probably listened to that piece of music more than anything else, you know, more times. And it's incredible. But I listen to a lot of jazz, but that one in particular. And then I find that I listen to a lot of soundtracks. I mentioned Blade Runner, and I have the vinyl. A friend of mine gave me the vinyl of that. That's something special. But a soundtrack that's far more obscure, but to me is just perfect for writing, is, this one's, The End of the Affair is good, because that's one of my favorite books and a really favorite film of mine. But The Human Stain, which I also really liked the book and thought they did a pretty good job with the movie, but the soundtrack of The Human Stain, I like soundtracks, and that's what I spend a lot of time in the background, the desultory sound when I'm writing. That's what's going on. How about you?
Well, I mean, I think it's important in your books to give a musical identity to characters, and so I do research and exploring on that. But I don't listen to a whole lot of music when I'm writing. If I do, I'll listen to jazz, because I'm more often than not writing a Harry Bosch book, and that can help. I have a busy house. I have, you know, an employee, a wife, a teenage daughter, and so forth, and I often play music as a signal to them not to bother me. When they hear jazz music, because I didn't grow up listening to jazz, so when I'm playing jazz, that means I'm working on a guy who listens to jazz, and so they know to kind of stay away. But yeah, I grew up more like in, you know, blues and rock, stuff like Allman Brothers, Cream, stuff like that, Rolling Stones. And you know, and I love listening to that when I'm driving and so forth, but, you know, it's not too often that I'm spinning this, you know, when I'm writing.
Okay, just very briefly, let's just mention a few books that have been influential or important to us. I mentioned Into the Affair earlier. That's one. Graham Greene's a guy who I really like, and that novel in particular. I want to mention somebody, you know, sort of obscure, but highly recommend Michael Connelly. He has, you know, several of his books have been inspirational. The Poet in particular. What year was that? Do you remember?
96.
So my first novel came out in 97, and so it was already written, but when I read The Poet, I don't know, it was just, and I'd read others, you know, and I loved The Concrete Blonde, and there's several early Bosch, and I like them all, but there was something about The Poet that was extraordinary for me, and so anyway, that's another. One more I'll mention is in Entertainment Weekly. James Lee Burke was asked, what is the greatest mystery you've ever written or you've ever read? And he pulled out this, I'd never heard of the author or the book, but it's Ron Hansen's Mariette in Ecstasy. And it's beautifully written. It's really like a prose poem. It's gorgeous. And my family wanted to go on a cruise, which sounded like a special kind of hell to me. I just did not at all want to do that. But over a Thanksgiving weekend, we did, I mean, kicking and screaming, I went on this cruise. But I took that book, and that was my cruise experience, was that book, and it was life-changing. It was really incredible, and so highly recommend it.
I can't think of a book like a change your life type of book that I can, you know, all I can say is that I got into this being a writer by being a voracious reader, and then when you're a writer, especially with today's technology and laptops and so forth, you can write anywhere you used to read, and so for me, reading it has taken a major tumble, and that's like one of the disappointments in my life, and another reason why I think I'm not going to write till I'm 84 like Elmore Leonard. I want to stop and catch up on all the reading I've missed, because it is what, you know, brings you to the table. You know, and there's been many books that, you know, struck me. I think I was given To Kill a Mockingbird at the right moment in my life where it really made a difference for me, and it wasn't a chore to read. You know, I think if I had been given that book to read 3 months earlier, I would have hated it. But I just happened to get it at the right time, and so that's, you know, obviously influential book and so forth. You know, and because my reading time is really limited, and I'm often reading stuff that hasn't come out yet that people send to me, either because it's going to be published and they want me to endorse it, or I do a lot of critiquing of manuscripts when I have the time. And so you really kind of look around for the gems, and you know, this is a long way, and it's kind of weird to do this since you're sitting here, but I want to circle back to double exposure. The reading experience of having read that book was very singular in the last 10 years of my life as a reader, and it was because it kept me glued to a seat. I can remember, you know, I'm not talking about fabulous literature when I talk about this other book, but I can remember reading, starting reading a Michael Crichton book that was just propulsive in the story. I'm trying to remember which one it was, but I think it was Rising Sun or something. Something they made a bad movie out of, you know that. But I just thought I'd read a few chapters, and the next thing you know, I read through the night, and it ruined my day the next day because I had to go to work. And but I could not stop reading that book. And so I think there's only been maybe 4 or 5 of those experiences in my life, and your book was one of them. And so you always remember something like that. And yeah, so I would highly recommend that book.
Thank you very much. Okay, so for the next few minutes, we are going to switch things just a little bit. And these are going to be just questions for you. I won't answer. They're just for you. And GQ called Michael Connelly the greatest crime writer alive. And they're not the only ones to have done that, and I wholeheartedly agree. So I think I wanted to dedicate just a little time to some specific questions for you. And what I'd like to do is ping pong, like pretty fast, quick answers. You know, let's just try to move through these. First one is boxers or briefs? At the same time?
At the same time.
Both at the most awkward moment you had with Matthew McConaughey?
Oh, this is a pretty awkward moment. The newspaper, when the movie came out, Lincoln Lawyer, newspaper set up this thing where he and I would drive around in the back of the Lincoln, and we'd have a chauffeur, and then the reporter would be on the front seat. And when we got in the car, they had I guess they had done some research on him, and they had a big bucket of ice with his favorite beer, and I can't remember what it was. It was a Mexican beer, Modelo or something. And we're driving all around Los Angeles, going to sites from the movie and going to sites from the book, and we're drinking this beer and we're drinking this beer, and this thing goes on for a few hours. And then we finally go to the neighborhood where I wrote the book. I used to live in this hillside neighborhood that had a great view of the city, and I said we could go up there and look at the view. And I didn't live there anymore, and it's also the house that I used for Mickey Haller in the books. And so I said, yeah, in the books this is where he lives, in the movie he lives somewhere else. And we're sitting there, and McConaughey says, excuse me a minute, and he gets out of the car and takes a leak on the wall of my old neighbor's house. And I'm thinking, this is going to end up in the LA Times, because he's struggling to be taken seriously because of all his past history and so on. So this was pre-Oscar and all that. And that was kind of weird. So I'm sitting there looking at the reporter, and we know what he's doing. And it was like I didn't have much to say.
Great story. I didn't even know there was one, but I just assumed there might be. How many pairs of shoes do you own?
Not including sneakers, 4.
Nice. You willing to answer anything? You tell the truth? Have you ever been to farmersonly.com?
No, I don't even know what it is. Is that something from the Redneck Riviera?
Yeah, it's real popular up in our area. Biggie or Tupac?
Exactly. Obviously,
Okay.
Tupac.
Tupac, okay. Why is
I had
it?
going back to the music, I did listen, when I was writing The Lincoln Lawyer, I was shadowing some defense attorneys, and these were white guys who most of their clients were black. So they told me they listened to Tupac so they can try to understand their clients, because all our clients are listening to Tupac. So I started listening to him while I was writing that, and then, I couldn't understand the lyrics, so I got the lyrics, through Google or something, and saw some fantastic lyrics, so I started putting the lyrics all through that book. And then, when you use lyrics, you got to clear them, you got to ask permission, and some smart musicians that say, well, this is going to help me sell some records, so go ahead, thanks a lot for putting the lyrics in your book. But others charge you, and by this time Tupac was dead, and 4 different entities, relatives and companies and so forth had the rights to his music, and so they sent me a bill to use his lyrics, and it was like $125,000. And so I said, nah, that's okay. And so the finished book only has 1 set of lyrics from Tupac. But I always look at that book and say, oh, I wish that could have gone out with those lyrics in the right spots, because they meant something in the book. But that was a case where, art and cash collided in a bad way.
I think that happens a lot. As Alan said, you've won a lot of awards, but I noticed you've never won Poe's Pen, the Poe's Pen, and I was there a hint of envy when you gave that out this year?
No, I assumed that because I was giving it out, that off the page, or we understood that I had won one before.
you spend a lot of time on the West Coast, and obviously a lot of time on the East Coast. You're writing about there, you're living here. Is there any way in which being bi-coastal is similar to being bisexual?
I wouldn't know.
Okay.
Let me tell a story that's funnier than all this. Since Alan listed all these awards, one of them he listed was the 38 Caliber Award they give out in France, in Paris. And when I said they give these out in bars, it's really true. And like there's a famous literary bar, and so famous I can't even remember the name. But anyway, the patrons of this bar get together and give out the 38 Caliber Award, basically talking about it at the bar. So it's not like this like upper level thing, but then you go to the bar and they have a celebration, they give you the award. And so I did that once when I was in Paris, and the award is actually a 38 caliber pistol. And you know, I flew over there, and you can't take that gun back with you. And so I know one guy who wanted Lawrence Block. He knew somebody that was in the consulate, and his gun was sent back in a State Department bag that was unopened and so forth. So he got one back, but I knew I couldn't take this back, and my translator was there, and I'm thinking like, well, he translated the book, and they loved it, so he deserves it more than me, and so I gave him the gun. And when he was driving home that night, since we had been in a bar, he got pulled over for a DUI, and he had this gun sitting, unregistered gun sitting on the seat next to him, so he ended up spending the night in jail.
Nice.
So you don't want too many awards.
You don't want too many awards. Well, I'm doing well on that. Let's close with this. You mentioned earlier that you feel like you take a craftsman's approach. If I understand your dad was a contractor, a builder, a home builder, if that's true, do you build a novel? Do you see yourself? Are there similarities to what he did and what you do, and is there any connection to your approach and maybe what he did and what you would have done if you'd done the family business?
Yeah, there was a creative approach. He did everything. He wasn't an architect by training, so what he would do is design a house, use that kind of creative thing, and then he'd get an architect to do what needs to be done to get it permitted and all that stuff, But so he had these ideas going, and then he would carry it through. So he was, from the idea or the drawing to the actual physical building and finishing. And then he also did some very interesting advertising campaigns for the homes and other structures he built. So he was definitely a very creative guy. And so I was going up to that University of Florida. And I was actually majoring in construction engineering when I had that moment where I said I want to be a writer. And so when I went home and told him that, I was kind of bracing for this is not going to go over well, and it turned out it went over quite well because I think he connected with that idea, the creativity involved, and there are some similarities. It's hard to put your finger on them, but there are some similarities, and so he was very fostering of this idea, this goal of basically putting me in a position to be able to take a shot at writing novels.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here with us. We really appreciate it. Oh, okay. You want to, yeah. Oh, one more thing. Sorry, one more thing. I was going to do this privately, but we're going to do it publicly now. I have a present for you that I'm going to share with everybody. This is something.
It's not a 38 caliber.
It's not a gun. It's got to be at least 5 years ago. I saw this print and I had this idea, and so I've been like conceiving, working, on this, and my wife, who is far more artistic than she claims to be, helped me finish it so we could bring it tonight. But what we have done is incorporated aspects of your novels, your Bosch novels, into the painting of Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. So you could spend all kind of time looking for, and they're everywhere. They're mixed in similar to the way he did the, and of course up here it says A Darkness More Than Night, which is also one of those other novels that I think is just truly brilliant. And it uses this painting obviously a lot. But except for the new one, every single Bosch book, there's elements of it in this painting now. And,
Cool.
and
Thank you
anyway,
very
so
much.
thank you for everything you've done for us. And I mean, really, thanks to Dawn for making it a reality. If you drink and get pulled over tonight, and this is in your back seat, they may have some questions.
Yeah.
But I don't think you'll get arrested, yeah. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Did he mean it?
Did who mean what?
Chaplain Jordan, would he really do anything he could for the inmate? Did he mean what he said?
Yeah, of course he meant it. John will do anything for anybody who needs it. I mean anybody. I mean, it's the way he's wired. It ain't got nothing to do with requests, gun, hostages, or even that white collar that he wears around his neck. It's just who he is. So, hell yeah, he meant it.
Could I be free from this guilt and this pain? Is power in the blood, power in the blood. Could grace rain down and wash away my shame? Is wonderful power in the blood. Could I be free from my passion and pride? Is power in the blood, power in the blood. Can my debt ever be satisfied? Is wonderful power in the blood. Is there power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb? Is there power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb? Is there parole from the sentence I serve? Is power in the blood, power in the blood? When that day comes, Lord, don't let me lose my nerve. Is there any power in the blood? Is there power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb? Is there power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb?
You're a recovering alcoholic, is that right? You just recently moved back from Atlanta, right? Recently divorced, lost your job. Were you involved in some sort of scandal there? You've been through a lot lately.